Hey guys, today I'll show you a science fiction horror TV series named The Mist. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins with a soldier waking from unconsciousness, finding himself unexpectedly in the depths of the mountains with a military dog crouching at his side. For some unknown reason, he had forgotten all his prior memories. Despite the many questions, he felt he had no choice but to leave first. Before long, a large white mist began drifting towards him. The military dog, as if it had detected something fishy, barked incessantly at the mist and then suddenly charged into it. The soldier named Brian, fearing danger, followed closely behind. The fog was denser than he had anticipated, making it impossible to see even a few meters ahead. All he could do was grope around, guided by the sound of the dog. Suddenly, a cry of distress came from the dog. Brian moved closer and found his canine companion had become a cold, terrifying corpse. He realized that there must be some danger lurking in the mist, prompting him to run towards the outskirts of the mountains. From a road sign, he learned of a human settlement not far away. As the eerie mist gradually closed in, Brian dashed to the town's police station. He warned the sheriff about the strange white mist and the suspicious circumstances of his dog's death, insisting there must be something dangerous lurking. But seeing the soldier's agitated demeanor, the town sheriff suspected he might be on drugs. The sheriff and his deputy quickly subdued him and locked him in isolation. Once he had calmed down, he discovered that a woman was being detained in the adjacent room. Her name was Mia. She said that she had recently returned from out of town and had planned to retrieve some items from her home, only to find out it had changed ownership. Mia's mother had passed away 2 months earlier. She struggled to contain her grief, planning to retrieve her belongings from the warehouse in the quiet of the night. But she was discovered by the homeowner. Mia pretended to surrender, seized the opportunity to knock him down, but didn't manage to get far before being apprehended by the sheriff who had just arrived. Brian wanted to warn Mia about the approaching mist, but was again ignored. Before long, the sheriff and his deputy came to collect his information for registration, but he couldn't remember his identity, not even his social security number. The sheriff was inclined to release him, but for now, he could do nothing but keep him detained. When the sheriff returned to the lobby, he was met with a father and daughter reporting an incident. It turned out that the girl, Alex, had inadvertently gotten drunk at a dinner party the previous night and had been violated by a classmate. The sheriff's face changed as he heard the story, suggesting Alex should get a medical examination immediately. The next day, her father, Kevin, returned to the station, accompanied by Alex's best friend, Adrian, who had also attended the party and could act as a witness. As the sheriff was becoming frustrated by these petty affairs, he was unaware that a true disaster was approaching. The first indication of trouble was noticed by an elderly woman named Natalie, who lived nearby. She observed a multitude of toads hopping out of the river, followed by numerous birds flying out of the mountains. Sensing something amiss, she rushed to the library to research. Many years ago, the town had experienced a similar event where a mass exodus of animals from the mountains had occurred, resulting in the death of 6 residents. It was explained as a result of a natural disaster, but she believed there was more to it. At the same time, Kevin and the others in the police station heard shouting from outside. They rushed out to see a massive fog swiftly approaching like a tsunami, rapidly enveloping the town. Kevin was taken aback by the spectacle and suddenly received a call from his daughter saying she and her mother were shopping in the supermarket. However, as the fog engulfed Kevin, the call abruptly cut off. The sheriff felt the arrival of the fog was too peculiar and urged everyone to get inside. However, his deputy seemed strangely excited, having never encountered such a dense fog before, and decided to take some photos as a memento. But in the next moment, a cockroach suddenly crawled onto him. The deputy freaked out, slapping at it, but found more and more cockroaches crawling onto him. Hearing his deputy's screams from a distance, the sheriff rushed over, only to be stunned by the sight. There was no time for explanations. He quickly jumped into his police car and sped off. On the other side of town, Natalie, who had just finished her research, was preparing to return home with her husband. They found their path shrouded in fog. Unaware of the danger, they groped their way forward. Suddenly, they heard a child's cry from within the dense fog, which startled them. As they prepared to backtrack, a man wielding a gun appeared. He asked if this was an illusion, then without hesitation pulled the trigger. The man then aimed the gun at his own head. Despite being old, Natalie ran fast like a Tesla bike, quickly finding refuge in the town's church. Seeing the venerable priest, she felt a bit safer. Kevin also sensed the strangeness of the fog. He was preparing to leave with Adrian when they heard a shout from the police station. It turned out that Brian, seeing the fog approaching, wanted Kevin to let him go. Mia also didn't want to stay. Kevin ultimately decided to let them go. As they prepared to leave, the deputy appeared, his face covered in blood. Caught off guard, Kevin was pinned to the ground. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out. It was Mia who had come to the rescue. She appeared calm and composed, clearly not someone to mess with. As they looked at the increasingly thickening mist, they wondered what had happened to the deputy. Kevin felt they couldn't just stay put. He decided to go to the mall to find his wife and daughter, where there was also enough supplies to last them for a long time. His proposal was supported by everyone. After packing, the group opened the door and ran towards the police car. Luckily, everything went smoothly. Once they got in the car, they immediately drove towards the mall. Meanwhile, Kevin's daughter Alex was waiting in the car while her mother was paying. Suddenly, a large fog drifted over. She sensed something was wrong. Before she could react, she stumbled upon a gruesome corpse on the ground. Alex started to tremble and wet her pants. She faintly heard someone calling her name. Looking closely, she realized it was her mother. Without wasting any time, they rushed into the mall. But before they could breathe a sigh of relief, they encountered a mother and son trying to leave. Alex tried to stop them, but they didn't heed her warning. With a few scoffs, they left under the fearful gaze of everyone. The next moment, screams echoed from the fog. Everyone moved closer to the door, only to see the woman reappear, then be dragged away by some force. The sight left everyone in the mall terrified. Attempts to call the police failed due to lack of signal. Alex's mother, Eve, comforted her, assuring her that as long as they stayed in the mall, help would eventually arrive. But when Alex saw a familiar boy not far away, she was taken aback. Though she couldn't remember who violated her that night, Adrian insisted it was this boy named Jay, and now he was trapped in the same mall with them. At this point, the mall manager and security guards approached. After understanding the circumstances of the mother and son's demise, the mall manager couldn't help looking outside, speculating that there could be a dangerous beast hidden in the strange fog. He quickly locked the main door, then turned to the rest of the people, requesting everyone to secure all doors and windows in the mall. Eve also received a set of keys. As they locked a side door, they unintentionally saw the fog filling the nearby corridor, with a corpse lying within. The sight left them speechless with fear. They quickly ran to report to the mall manager. Eve pointed out the location on the map, and the manager recognized that the fog-filled area belonged to the administrative section. Someone suggested that they should not just sit and wait for death, but should seek help from the outside world as soon as possible. The manager suddenly remembered that there was a set of radios in the administrative section. Perhaps they could use it to contact the outside world. But at this point, the administrative section was already enveloped by the fog, and everyone was unsure of the dangers lurking within. Suddenly, Alex remembered that there was a store selling drones in the mall. This made things much easier. They quickly fetched a drone and sent it into the corridor. Jay, familiar with the controls, expertly maneuvered the drone slowly in. Soon they saw an open window, presumably where the fog entered. Then they saw a pool of blood and several gruesome corpses on the ground in the monitor. Although they didn't see the killer, the sight still sent chills down their spines. But the manager seemed much calmer, insisting that they must let the outside world know there were still survivors here. Someone needed to go to the administrative section to get the radio. Someone proposed that the manager himself should go, but he responded that it would be better to draw lots. Everyone agreed with this suggestion. The result of the draw was surprising. It was Eve who drew the short straw. Fortunately, a man volunteered to accompany her. If they ran into danger, at least they would have each other for support. On the other side, Kevin and his group were on their way to the mall. Suddenly, someone blocked their path. When Mia stepped on the brakes, the person actually pulled out a gun, intending to hijack the car. Mia was furious and floored the accelerator, knocking over the robber and speeding forward. Brian kept reminding her to slow down, but Mia seemed not to hear. As a result, the police car overturned and was thrown off the road. Everyone was okay, but they were temporarily trapped in the car. The next moment, cracks began to appear in the car window, which then shattered. Everyone was scared stiff and kept hitting the car door. Finally, they managed to kick open a way out at the critical moment. But now, they were completely exposed to the dense fog, unsure of what horror they would encounter next. Realizing they can't stay here for long, the group instinctively starts running. In the midst of their flight, Mia sees a figure that eerily resembles her deceased mother. As her focus starts to waver, Brian appears, forcibly pulling her along to keep moving. Thankfully, they manage to reach a nearby church without any any mishaps, where they find the town's sheriff who had fled for his shitty life before them. It turns out that after leaving his station, the sheriff accidentally hit a deer, rendering his car inoperable. With no other option, he took refuge in the nearby church. He certainly didn't expect to encounter Kevin again, let alone the two criminals who were imprisoned at the station. Without hesitation, he cuffs the rebellious Mia, leaving Kevin in a difficult situation. Kevin had planned to rest here briefly before finding a vehicle to leave. But now, with Mia captured, Kevin had no choice but to confront the sheriff again. He wants to go to the mall to rescue his family and hopes to bring the two criminals along for backup. The sheriff, however, refuses to comply, believing that keeping the suspects close would pose a greater risk. As a result, he refuses to release the prisoners and also locks Kevin in the church basement. Adrian is desperate to help but feels powerless. At this moment, Natalie stands up. Ever since losing her partner, she's been distraught, resenting God for his injustice. After the funeral, it seems she no longer wants to live alone. Silently, she opens the church doors and walks out fearlessly. A young man rushes to stop her, but it's too late. The fog is now so thick that a moth suddenly emerges from it, burrowing into the man's ear. The next moment, his back starts to writhe, and a pair of wings rupture from his body. As he screams in pain, countless moths burst forth from his mouth. Natalie watches in stupefied silence before her dying body is pulled back into the church by the sheriff and the priest. Oddly enough, the previously despondent lady seems to have transformed, no longer speaking of suicide. She is now unwavering in her belief, convinced that she has seen the new deity. A few days ago, she encountered a moth identical to the tattoo on the man's body. Adrian, having witnessed the whole ordeal, feels the atmosphere is too eerie and resolves to leave as soon as possible. Approaching the priest, Adrian pretends to be in pain and lost, sparking an enthusiastic response. The priest decides to perform a baptism for Adrian, which brings them closer. Seizing this opportunity, Adrian manages to steal the keys to the basement where Kevin is locked up. He promptly releases Kevin and the others, only to run into the sheriff. Without saying a word, Kevin lands several punches on him, finally venting his frustration. They quickly compose themselves, push open the church doors, and run wildly into the fog. Suddenly, Kevin trips over something. It's a young boy's corpse. They get back up and continue forward, eventually finding an abandoned car. Mia skillfully unlocks the car, but despite her efforts, she can't get it to start. Kevin mentions a nearby gas station which likely has cars. Everyone is concerned about the fog, but Adrian noticed earlier that the fog was particularly thick when the Mothman was attacked. After some thought, Kevin decides to wait for the fog to thin before venturing out again. As time ticked away, the fog outside finally began to thin significantly. The group of survivors simultaneously opened the car doors and rushed outside. They weren't sure whether their assumptions about the fog were correct, but in order to find his wife, Kevin had no choice but to take a chance. Coincidentally, his wife Eve was also about to embark on a life-and-death adventure. Along with a stranger, she opened the door to a fog-filled corridor and ran forward without hesitation. Their journey was unexpectedly smooth. Before long, they found the radio that was left in the office, but there was no response from any of the channels they tried. Suddenly, the stranger adjusted the radio to a special frequency, continuously calling out to a squad codenamed Shadow. This immediately put Eve on high alert, and she suggested bringing the radio to the hall. However, the stranger didn't respond to her. Seeing the handgun on him, Eve's unease grew stronger. She instinctively turned to run back to the main hall, but was quickly caught up. Not willing to die just yet, Eve forcefully knocked the weapon out of his hand and started attacking his down with a fire extinguisher. In the ensuing chaos, Eve picked up the fallen gun and fired without mercy. At this point, she didn't care about the man's life, only about getting away. She finally escaped the fog and saw her daughter in the corridor. When questioned by the others, Eve lied, saying she had gotten separated from the stranger in the corridor. The walkie-talkie they had placed hopes on was also broken, which left everyone feeling disappointed. Only Eve was suspicious, asking the mall manager if the few people with the stranger had been to the mall for the first time. After receiving an affirmative answer, her suspicions deepened. As night fell, she couldn't fall asleep, wondering about the origins of the stranger and his companions, and if they were related to the appearance of the fog. Meanwhile, the sleepless Jay got up to use the restroom. Looking in the mirror, he was shocked to discover that the two companions of the stranger had stopped breathing. Jay didn't dare to hesitate and immediately called the mall manager and the security guard. All of them were filled with questions, wondering what could have driven them to such despair. While cleaning up the bodies, they accidentally discovered the dog tags on the deceased's necks, revealing that they were military officers. As soon as the manager announced this discovery, all eyes fell on the only remaining companion of the stranger. Sensing that he wanted to escape, the security guard went to apprehend him. As it turned out, this man was also a soldier. Everyone immediately became excited, guessing that the military must know what's happening outside. However, it turned out that the man was only a low-ranking private and had no access to any information. As everyone was at a loss, two youths who had been labeled as good-for-nothing came up with a bold idea. They quietly pushed the two bodies out of the side door and hid behind it to observe. They thought this would not only solve the problem of body storage, but might also help them understand what was hiding in the fog. But after half a day, there was no movement outside. What they didn't expect was that the friend of the deceased found them out, and their actions were quickly discovered. The manager believed that the two good-for-nothings were causing trouble, possibly putting everyone in danger. He felt it was necessary to establish some rules to prevent reckless actions. This idea was supported by the majority, and many people proposed rules that would enhance safety. If violated, the perpetrator would be expelled from the mall. Some rules were quickly confirmed. Eve felt this was inhumane and decided to move out of the hall, not wanting to lower herself to their level. The manager and others tried to persuade Eve, at which point she pulled out the weapon she had gotten from the stranger, causing everyone to freeze. As a result, Eve and her daughter Alex moved to a room next door. Living with them were a few other families. Everyone was certain that if they stayed here, help would eventually arrive. Alex came up with an idea. She tied a note pleading for help to a balloon, confident that once it flew out, someone would see the message. This was less of a survival tactic and more of a psychological refuge, because losing hope could only lead to despair, even breakdown. The mall manager evidently recognized this and arranged for some entertainment tools to be found in the supermarket, hoping to ease everyone's anxiety. The good girl's way of relieving stress naturally was to read. Alex invited the little girl living with her to go to the bookstore. It was connected to the hall and not covered by the fog, so the parents felt it was safe and did not object. Little did they know, there was no absolutely safe place in the fog-covered town. The two good-for-nothings who had pushed the bodies out of the door were scolded by everyone and decided to do something to make up for their mistakes. One of them got a fishing gun from the sporting goods store, intending to use it to drag the bodies back. The plan initially went well, but when they shot at the second body, the rope seemed to get entangled with something. The man in red went out to check, but there was no movement for a long time. The remaining companion, named Tyler, sensed something was wrong. As he was looking around, the body of the man in red suddenly flew over, shattering the glass. Thick fog surged in from the shattered glass door. Tyler was so scared he ran off in his wet pants. He didn't stop when he passed the reading area, just ran straight to the hall. This caused trouble for Alex and the others who were still reading. The thick fog filled the room in an instant, and a large, dark figure appeared vaguely. The two girls were so scared that their faces turned pale and screams turned chicken-like. The adults outside heard the noise and were about to save them, but seeing the monster inside, they were all rooted to the spot, not even having the courage to open the door. Now the little girl trapped inside was unlucky. The dark shadow slowly turned into a dark fog and swallowed her. Then it quickly moved to Alex and slowly approached with a low growl. The two mothers outside the bookstore, knowing that their daughters were in great danger, squatted on the ground, weeping. However, a figure suddenly walked out of the thick fog. It was Alex, unharmed. Eve ran up in disbelief, not hiding the joy in her eyes at all. Alex explained that the shadow did nothing and then suddenly left. Now the other girl's mother, Shelley, was not calm. Her daughter was dead. Everyone vented their anger on Tyler. If he hadn't opened the door privately, the fog wouldn't have entered the bookstore. This act obviously threatened the safety of the group. According to the rules set earlier, Tyler must be expelled from the mall. The manager had no choice but to let everyone vote by a show of hands. As a result, most people agreed. Fortunately, they were kind enough to provide Tyler with enough food for 3 days, then forced him out of the mall. Although her daughter Alex had luckily survived, Eve had not let down her guard. She became aware of the terror of the fog again, wondering how her husband Kevin was doing. At this moment, Kevin and his group were frantically running through the dense fog. They managed to find a car, but it wouldn't start. Their only option was to abandon the vehicle and run towards a nearby gas station. Unfortunately, they didn't find any trace of a car there either. Dejected, they sought refuge in a store. Just when they were at a loss, a pickup truck slowly pulled up outside. The driver quickly noticed the group in the store. Surprisingly, he turned out to be a co-worker of Kevin's wife, whom they had met a few times before. The driver had come for fuel, and he had been searching all day and night for his missing son. The moment Kevin saw a picture of the boy, he immediately recognized him as the corpse they had encountered on the road earlier. However, in front of the driver, Kevin shook his head to indicate that he hadn't seen the boy, subtly hinting at the others to keep quiet, because he didn't want to shatter the driver's hope by revealing his son's death. After some words of encouragement, Kevin asked the driver to take him to the mall. Unexpectedly, the driver refused as he planned to find his son. Mia lost her composure and blurted out the news of the driver's son's death, which enraged the driver, who thought it was an excuse invented by Kevin to get a free ride. As the situation threatened to spiral out of control, Brian tried to seize the driver's weapon. Unexpectedly, the driver shot Brian in the leg. Watching Brian writhing in pain, the driver panicked. He wasn't inherently bad. He finally decided to give his pickup truck to Kevin and urged them to head to a hospital as soon as possible. However, the driver had no plan to accompany them. The moment he learned of his son's death, he lost all hope to survive. Kevin continued to dash down the foggy road. Despite the low visibility, he didn't slow down because Brian's condition was worsening. They finally reached the hospital. Fortunately, it was not yet enveloped by the fog, and a large group of survivors was waiting for rescue. Without answering many questions thrown at them, Kevin and the group quickly rushed Brian into the emergency room. However, the doctor told them other buildings of the hospital had been sealed off by the fog. Resources like medicines and food, and even engine power were dwindling. However, the good news was that there were still enough resources to manage Brian's surgery, but he would need a few days of rest to recover. This put Kevin in a dilemma, whether to wait or leave Brian behind and head to the mall to meet his wife. At this point, he realized that a familiar face was on one of the hospital beds. It turned out to be his own brother. Their unexpected reunion was marred by the brother's grave condition. A steel rod had pierced his organs. The doctor said there was no sterile operating room in this building, meaning his brother could only lie there, waiting for death. This forced Kevin to abandon his plan to leave the hospital. Seeing his brother's strong will to live, Kevin was determined not to let him die. He then sought the head doctor and asked how to save his brother. The doctor explained that the only way was to go to the sterile operating room isolated by the fog and remove the steel rod from his brother's organs. However, the doctor himself had no plans to take the risk. Kevin understood his selfish decision and knew he had to rely on himself. He quickly returned to his brother's ward, helped him onto a mobile bed, and decided to take his brother to the sterile operating room himself. The corridors were already shrouded in dense fog. Kevin had to move as fast as possible, not even slowing down at the sight of dead bodies. Just when his brother seemed unable to hold on, they finally reached the sterile operating room. But it wasn't over. Kevin had no experience in the operation. His only option was to proceed step by step under the remote guidance of the head doctor via radio. Although the surgery was risky, he managed to remove the steel rod and sew up the wound. At that moment, Kevin broke out in a cold sweat, realizing just how close a call he had just had. All he needed to do next was to get his older brother back to the office building. However, to his dismay, his brother couldn't stop coughing up blood, indicating that the internal injuries clearly were not healing. As they were about to reach the corridor exit, Kevin didn't notice the blood on the floor and tripped. When he returned to his brother's side, he found a leech on his body. Looking up, he saw the ceiling covered with numerous leeches, falling onto his brother one by one. Kevin tried to remove the leeches, but he couldn't keep up with the falling rate. He could only watch as his brother was covered by the leeches. Knowing his brother was beyond saving, Kevin pulled the trigger. At that moment, Kevin was filled with frustration. After all the troubles he had gone through, it was all for nothing. After forcing his sadness and regret out of his mind, Kevin decided to leave the hospital first thing the next morning. As he was saying goodbye to the attending doctor, he noticed that the doctor had a patient tied to the bed. Seeing Kevin approaching, the doctor quickly explained that he was about to administer a sedative. Kevin, slightly puzzled, approached to inspect, but the doctor suddenly turned violent, stabbing Kevin in the neck with the sedative. Kevin closed his eyes in resentment. Meanwhile, Brian and Adrian in the ward felt something was amiss. Kevin had said he would be back soon, but he was nowhere to be seen. By this time, Kevin had regained consciousness, only to find himself unable to move, tightly bound to a hospital bed. The attending doctor walked in slowly, revealing that he had been tying up multiple patients over the past few days for experiments to understand the characteristics of a dense mist. After conducting several experiments, he had noticed that the mist could transform into different crises based on human obsessions. He prepared to inject Kevin with drugs to slow metabolism and hormones, hoping to reduce the harm of the mist to humans. After the injection, the doctor quickly left the room, then opened another door, and a dense mist immediately covered Kevin. The doctor wanted to see if Kevin could last longer than others. To the doctor's surprise, nearly a minute passed, and Kevin was not harmed. Although he saw some illusions, none threatened his life. After 2 minutes, Kevin saw another version of himself appear, which indicates that he was on the verge of collapse to meet his maker. Just at that crucial moment, Brian and Adrian arrived for rescue. After quickly dealing with the doctor, they dragged Kevin out. Knowing they couldn't stay, they planned to leave the hospital immediately. However, before they could get far, the hospital lights suddenly went out. With the power outage, all the electric doors opened automatically, and the dense mist rolled in instantly. Chaos ensued in the hospital. Kevin and the others dared not continue, running around aimlessly. When they passed the psychiatric ward, they saw the door was closed with shadows moving inside. They knocked desperately for help as the mist was closing in, and the ward door was finally opened. Without thinking, they rushed in. Fortunately, this was an isolated area, so the mist couldn't enter for a while. Kevin had had enough of this hospital and was ready to stand up to find an exit. However, the bearded doctor stopped him, saying there were no patients here and they could rest here for the night before leaving. Everyone nodded in agreement, sensing his goodwill. Adrian was especially pleased because, in the chaos, he had run into a high school classmate. In these apocalyptic times, knowing someone familiar naturally offered some comfort. But it was also due to the end of the world that people could become incredibly terrifying. At midnight, Kevin, sound asleep like a pig, was awakened by Adrian's friend, who told him that Adrian had disappeared. So Kevin began to anxiously search for him. As he was walking past a corridor door, he noticed a pool of blood on the ground. Kevin opened the door only to find many bodies hidden inside. This immediately prompted Kevin to suspect the bearded doctor. He couldn't make sense of what was happening to this hospital and why the doctors were behaving so strangely. He realized that all of it was the handiwork of the bearded doctor in front of him. Seeing that the doctor was about to run, Kevin chased after him. However, the bearded doctor quickly hid his smelly beard in a locked room. Kevin then spotted Adrian bound in the room and immediately lost his calm. The door to the room was obviously reinforced. No matter what he tried, it couldn't be opened. The bearded doctor seemed mentally unstable, believing that the mist was caused by the arrival of demons and that Adrian was a messenger of the demons and had to be eliminated immediately. Kevin, outside the door, became even more anxious, quickly lying that he himself was the messenger of the demons. He then put on an extremely ferocious look, expressing his desire to torment everyone to death. The bearded doctor, after sensing Kevin's demonic anger through his sensitive beard, was taken aback and actually believed Kevin's nonsense, agreeing to exchange the innocent Adrian for him. The moment Kevin entered the room, he immediately knocked the doctor to the ground and hit his beard hard with a baseball bat. After dealing with the problem again, Kevin didn't want to stay in the hospital another moment and planned to leave that night. However, Adrian's friend felt that this was the safest place and had no plans to leave. Kevin and his group once again embarked on their journey to the mall. Unknowingly, they passed the block where Adrian's house was located. The boy missed his mother very much and decided to take a risk and go home to see her. Kevin planned to accompany Adrian, but was refused by him. When he quickly ran back to his house, he found all the doors and windows tightly closed. His father was eating dinner alone in the living room. His face was cold when he saw his son. It turned out that the father and son had always been at odds because the father strongly disliked his son's appearance and sexual orientation. Adrian didn't pay him any attention and hurried to his bedroom. He saw his mother lying motionless on the couch. Upon closer inspection, he realized his mother had already passed away. His father explained that on the third day of the mist's arrival, his mother had been waiting outside the house for Adrian to return home and was affected. After the revelation, endless guilt and regret surged in Adrian because his mother was the only person in the world who truly loved him. But his harsh father didn't have a single word of comfort and kept mocking that it was because of Adrian that his mother died. He didn't consider his son's feelings at all. Adrian became angrier the more he listened and finally couldn't help picking up a weapon from the table, and without hesitation pulled the trigger to send his father straight to meet Satan. Sensing that his dad had completely stopped breathing, Adrian used a knife to cut a wound on his arm. At this moment, Kevin was still waiting inside the car. Suddenly, Adrian noticed a flickering light not too far off. A figure approached the vehicle. Surprisingly, it was Tyler that had been kicked out of the shopping mall earlier. Even more unexpectedly, he knew Kevin. Kevin swiftly opened the car door. Upon hearing that Tyler had been chased out of the mall, Kevin couldn't sit still any longer. He longed to have wings to fly to his wife, worried that she might be facing unfair treatment as well. Seeing that Adrian hadn't come out of the house yet, he immediately got out of the car to hurry him. When Kevin rushed into the room, he only saw the injured Adrian and his father lying motionless on the ground. Adrian presented a picture of utter despair, claiming that his father had tried to harm him, and that was why he had fought back with a gun. Without any doubt, Kevin comforted him and then took him to the storage room to find some hemostatic medicine. However, he found a bottle of sedative for insomnia in the medicine cabinet. Kevin felt something was off. How could Adrian at such a young age be using this? Nervously, Adrian let slip that he had been taking the medicine because he had been suffering from insomnia ever since he violated Alex. Kevin was dumbfounded. The one who had violated his daughter turned out to be the wretch right before his eyes. Adrian confessed that he had chosen to violate his best friend Alex and frame the boy Jay because he noticed Alex's affection for Jay and did not want to lose his only friend. It was then that Kevin realized how twisted Adrian's mind had become. His hands involuntarily began to tremble. Seizing the opportunity, Adrian broke free and grabbed a weapon, shouting that Alex was his and ignoring Kevin's desperate pleas. After venting out his rage, Adrian did not hesitate to pull the trigger. Seeing Kevin fall to the ground motionless, Adrian quickly ran out, climbed into the car, and fabricated a story to the group claiming that Kevin had been shot dead by his own father. The people in the car fell silent. With Kevin's death, it seemed unnecessary to go to the shopping mall now, but Adrian suggested they should go there anyway due to its abundant supplies and then make further plans. The group agreed, thinking that it made sense. Meanwhile, in the mall, Eve and her daughter were oblivious to the real devil drawing near. They were still feeling fortunate about their narrow escape from death. But to Shelley, who had tragically lost her daughter, their relief seemed like schadenfreude. A surge of resentment welled up in her heart. Yet Eve and her daughter were oblivious to all this. After greeting her mother, Alex went alone to the mall to gather supplies. When she walked into a warehouse, she suddenly found the door locked from the outside and gasoline spreading in. Before she could react, a huge fire ignited instantly. Startled, Alex retreated, shouting for help as the fire grew larger. Suddenly, a man's voice responded from outside. The door was quickly opened. It was Jay coming to her rescue. He had wrapped his hand with a wet towel and picked up a hot fire extinguisher. After much effort, he finally put out the fire. But when Alex walked out of the warehouse, she did not show any gratitude to her savior. She believed it was a drama orchestrated by Jay to win her favor. Hearing this, Jay was dumbstruck. He had merely happened to pass by and lend a hand. Furthermore, he had never assaulted Alex. After a series of helpless explanations, Alex offered to bandage Jay's wounds. However, the sight of two of them walking side by side in a friendly manner infuriated Eve. She warned Jay to stay away from her daughter, viewing him as the one who had violated her daughter. Poor Jay could only swallow his grievances. However, the survivors in the shopping mall had no time to pay attention to these side issues. The remaining food could only last for 3 days, and their primary concern was how to continue surviving. Suddenly, someone returned from outside with a few leaflets, which clearly stated that local guards would soon come to rescue everyone. The trapped people couldn't resist passing the leaflets around, and the gloom on their faces vanished. But only the manager could not feel joy, for he knew these so-called leaflets were printed by Eve, with the sole aim of calming people and preventing them from losing hope. Yet at this point, Eve didn't feel any pride. She felt uncomfortable seeing Alex and Jay exchanging glances. She repeatedly warned her daughter not to get too close to Jay, but Alex didn't appreciate the advice. This made Eve, who was protective of her daughter, feel a great sense of crisis. She felt she must do something. After Jay and Alex returned from their outing, someone suggested Jay go to the storeroom to collect some water. But when he finished the task and was about to leave, he found the door locked. It was a trap set by Eve. She wanted to restrict Jay's freedom and prevent him from meeting her daughter again. Alex quickly noticed the absence of Jay. She started looking for him. She came to the center of the mall and found that everyone was looking at her strangely. It turned out that the food was almost gone, and no news about rescue had arrived. Anxiety and fear began to spread again. At this moment, Shelley began to confuse Alex. She suggested that Alex's survival in the fog might indicate some connection between her and the appearance of the fog. They must do something proactively to get out of this predicament. Although this theory seemed ridiculous, people in desperate situations would instinctively clutch at straws, no matter how absurd or unreachable they were. Fortunately, the mall manager was still rational. He knew Shelley was merely trying to divert hatred. Just as the crowd was about to turn against Alex, he dismissed her with a random excuse. The manager realized he couldn't let Shelley continue to confuse the crowd. Otherwise, chaos would soon ensue. When night fell, the manager found Shelley alone and advised her to give up her crazy actions against Alex. Otherwise, he would expose her arson in front of everyone. It turned out that the manager had already investigated and found out that the person who had locked Alex in the warehouse and set the fire was Shelley. However, Shelley was unmoved and stated that she knew where the manager had been hiding food. This completely unsettled the old man. He explained that he had only hoarded food to conserve strength and better serve everyone. Of course, Shelley didn't believe his bullshit. She warned him if he exposed her for arson, then she would expose him for hoarding food. Seeing Shelley about to leave, the manager picked up a lamp from the ground and smashed it down on Shelley. This was clearly an attempt to silence her. No one could expect that the ostensibly righteous manager was such a ruthless character. This incident indicates that only when personal safety is guaranteed can people live under the mask of hypocrisy. When someone appeared at the crime scene, the manager cried foul, claiming he saw the perpetrator was Alex. The other survivors turned furious. Without a doubt, Eve and her daughter were in deep trouble. Despite their innocence, they were at a loss to defend themselves. Realizing that they couldn't stay there anymore, Eve immediately set out to find her daughter. She eventually found her in a corridor, and after explaining the situation, they decided to leave the mall. However, they had not gone far when they ran into a familiar figure. It's Alex's best friend, Adrian. Alex excitedly greeted him, naively questioning his presence. It turned out Adrian had reached the mall's entrance about 10 minutes ago. Due to their criminal identities, Mia and Brian decided to sneak in through the back door. Adrian, using the excuse of checking the hall, parted ways with them. In truth, Adrian planned to meet his love, Alex. He even rehearsed a set of excuses in a shop until they were foolproof. He didn't expect to encounter Alex and her mother so soon and began tearfully narrating how Kevin had sacrificed himself to protect him. Upon hearing the news of her father's death, Alex collapsed, devoid of any strength to stand. Eve also couldn't believe that Kevin was gone. Just then, a commotion echoed from the corridor. The manager was leading a group to arrest Alex. Without hesitation, they ran towards the back door, eventually hiding in a shop and temporarily evading the crowd. Adrian mentioned he had a car parked at the back door and suggested they could drive away. Eve thought the idea was good, but as soon as she opened the door, she saw the manager and others lurking outside. They didn't dare to delay and ran desperately in the opposite direction. Confident in her weapon, Eve let Adrian and Alex go first, while she hid behind a wooden box to cover their retreat. The cunning mall security guard leading the way sensed something amiss and slowed down, knocking Eve's weapon away at the last moment. This, however, bought Eve some time to escape, but unexpectedly, the corridor's end was a dead end. Cornered by the manager and others, Eve and her team didn't even have a chance to resist. Eve could only claim that her daughter didn't kill Shelley, but the manager didn't give her a chance to argue and hit her in her down. The security guard suggested that Jay, who had been missing for 2 days, might also have been killed by Alex. Onlookers also agreed. Seeing the situation worsening, Eve admitted that she had locked up Jay. Retribution came swiftly as Eve and her daughter were then locked in the same storage room where Jay was. When Alex and Jay embraced without a kiss, Adrian's eyes filled with rage, hinting that he was about to stir up trouble again. At the same moment, the manager was in the main hall, discussing with everyone how to deal with Eve and her daughter. Some suggested expelling them, while others favored execution. Just then, the long-absent sheriff unexpectedly appeared. Everyone looked at him in surprise, wondering if rescue had arrived. However, the sheriff's expression was complex, and he regretfully shook his head, saying he was the only one who had come. Everyone fell into disappointment. Feeling that the hall was not the place for such discussions, the manager invited the sheriff to his office for a conversation. It was only then that they learned that Natalie, who had claimed to see the new deity previously, also arrived with the sheriff. Subsequently, the sheriff, with a look of devotion, began to recount Natalie's miraculous experiences. Ever since she saw someone dying horribly, transforming into a moth in the fog, she became obsessed, deciding that God was no longer worth worshiping. Consequently, everyone else was also living in fear, worrying that Judgment Day was imminent. By chance, Natalie saw a giant spider and put it in a jar, believing it to be a revelation from the new deity. This peculiar behavior made everyone uneasy. Even the priest couldn't bear it, considering this his territory. He snatched away the spider and crushed it under his stinky foot. Natalie screamed in sorrow, feeling as if her entire faith had collapsed. Everyone who saw this felt sympathy for Natalie. The priest wanted to explain to everyone that he wasn't heartless, but Natalie had found another spider and walked up to him. The self-righteous sheriff stepped forward to protect Natalie, preventing the priest from harming her again. This allowed Natalie to freely discuss her new theological ideas in front of everyone. The priest noticed more and more people gathering around Natalie and knew this was not a good situation. He started playing the song Ave Maria on the piano, hoping to bring back the lost sheep. Surprisingly, most people chose to follow Natalie and leave, giving the priest a chilling realization. Natalie had a mature theory about the fog's origin, believing it was a punishment from nature. Only by obeying its will could everyone survive this crisis. This offered a lifeline to the desperate believers. Even the sheriff believed in this. The priest's young assistant also recognized the powerful influence behind Natalie and decided to put a stop to it. He tricked Natalie into a secluded warehouse and locked the door. His demeanor changed drastically as he warned her to stop leading people astray, proclaiming that only God is worth worshiping. However, Natalie was a tough cookie. She quickly grabbed a shovel, smashed the warehouse window, and swiftly exited, locking the door behind her. The assistant's pleas for help came from inside, but Natalie didn't pay any attention. Instead, she ran to the sheriff, claiming the assistant tried to kill her and was only saved by the timely intervention of the fog. This statement made the other believers firmly side with Natalie, assuming that the assistant's actions were instigated by the old priest. The sheriff couldn't hold back and gave the assistant a deadly beating. Natalie watched all this calmly, unconsciously humming a song. The distraught old priest, standing before the door where his assistant met a tragic end, understood that he had to do something to preserve his faith. He found Natalie and challenged her to a duel, stating that only those who survive in the fog can become the true messengers of the divine. Natalie, brimming with confidence, agreed without hesitation. Before long, the old priest, dressed in a red robe, appeared in the hall, forming a stark contrast with the carefree Natalie. To the surprise of everyone, they walked out together, and the church quickly disappeared into the thick fog. The priest's heart was filled with devotion, and he began to pray non-stop. Suddenly, the sound of horses' hooves came from not far away. The old priest opened his eyes wide in surprise. It was the legendary 4 knights of the cathedral. One of them drew his bow to full length. The old priest immediately tensed, unsure who the target was. In the next moment, the old priest was shot and dragged into the depths of the fog. Throughout the process, the 4 knights ignored Natalie, who returned to the church unscathed. After this event, her status among the believers soared. No one dared to refute what she said. Natalie firmly believed that if they purged those who had defiled nature, the fog would disperse. The Mothman who had died before, the old priest and others were all sinners, but merely eliminating them was not enough. She approached the sheriff, stating that to disperse the fog, they must eliminate the last sinner, Jay. At this point, like everyone else, she was deceived by Adrian's one-sided words, believing that Jay was the culprit who violated Alex. The sheriff's face changed upon hearing this because Jay was his biological son, but Natalie's persuasive skills were exceptional. A few minutes later, the deceived sheriff finally agreed to personally eliminate his son at the mall. Natalie requested all believers to go together so she could influence the other survivors in the mall. The biggest problem was how so many people would get to the mall. The sheriff said he had a way to get everyone there. Natalie was immediately revitalized, quickly calling everyone to pack their things. Just then, a believer approached Natalie, expressing that she didn't want to go to the mall, believing it's safer here. Unexpectedly, Natalie readily agreed, but upon leaving, she sealed the back door of the church, doused the floor with gasoline, and without hesitation, set a large fire. The screams of the people in the church filled the air, while Natalie, along with the sheriff and the 2 most loyal believer couple, entered the basement of the church. This led directly to the town's sewer system. The sheriff knew that this sewer could lead directly to the mall, undoubtedly a safe shortcut. But as they were about to arrive, the male believer accidentally fell from the ladder, unable to move. His wife pleaded with the sheriff to save him, but Natalie felt they should abandon him or it would slow down the process of saving the world. The man's wife slapped her in anger, shocked that the one she worshipped could be so heartless. Like a rude awakening, she decided to save her husband herself. Unexpectedly, after receiving a signal from Natalie, the sheriff drew his knife and stabbed it into the woman's body. He watched as the couple was overwhelmed by rats. The sheriff, obviously deceived by Natalie, seemed to be under a witchcraft. Before long, an entire church of survivors had died at their hands. Not much later, they finally reached the mall through the sewer. One could only imagine the disaster about to befall the mall's survivors. At the same time, Kevin, who had been shot by Adrian previously, slowly opened his eyes. Fortunately, the bullet only grazed his forehead. Right now, he had a formidable task at hand, as his wife and daughter were in grave danger at the mall. Apart from Kevin, all other survivors had arrived at the mall. Clearly, chaos was imminent. Kevin found himself surrounded by mist, and he knew he couldn't stay here for another minute, but his head was spinning and he couldn't find an exit. At the critical moment, Tyler appeared and helped Kevin escape the room. It turns out that when Brian and the group were preparing to go to the mall, Tyler was unable to recognize them and had to make an excuse and get off the car. By coincidence, he stumbled upon Kevin in the room, and after helping him escape, the two swiftly navigated through the fog. They finally found refuge in an empty room where an exhausted Kevin eventually succumbed to unconsciousness. When he woke up again, Tyler told him that Adrian had gone to the mall. Kevin became alert, wishing he could rush there. Fortunately, they were not far from the mall. Even without a car, they could safely reach there by hiding in houses and waiting for the fog to dissipate before setting off. Tyler thought this plan would work well. After preparing sufficient supplies, the two ran out of the door. They ran for a few hundred meters before quickly hiding in a house, only to be shocked to find the place littered with the soldiers' corpses. Suddenly, a man carrying a gun approached. Kevin sincerely explained that they were just passing by, but the gunman seemed tense. He explained that these soldiers had previously been setting fires everywhere before mysteriously dying. In the midst of their conversation, Kevin noticed a handgun on the floor and immediately ran over to it, creating a standoff with the gunman. Then, there was a muffled sound, and the gunman fell to the ground. Tyler had snuck up behind him and knocked him out. The two hurriedly searched the soldiers' bodies and finally found a military vehicle key. Tyler rushed out to start the car. Kevin noticed that the gunman had woken up, walked over to check out of curiosity, but didn't expect to find a grenade in the gunman's hand. Kevin jumped and used the corpses as a shield. Still, the explosive sound left Kevin dizzy and blew open the house door, allowing fog to pour in. This time, Kevin was affected, and in his haze, he saw his dead brother appear. However, he knew these were just illusions and ran towards the door, only to be blocked by another figure, an illusion of himself. But he was incredibly resilient and managed to knock down his doppelganger. Just as Kevin finally escaped from the house, a military vehicle pulled up. It was Tyler, who had arrived just in time. Without taking a moment to catch his breath, Kevin desperately climbed into the vehicle and urged Tyler to drive. They were not far from the mall now, and within less than half an hour they arrived at their destination. Kevin asked Tyler to stay in the car to cover him while he quietly entered the mall through a side door. He cautiously made his way to the hall, carefully scanning his surroundings. He didn't see Eve and Alex, so he proceeded to the back corridor to continue his search. Suddenly, faint footsteps echoed in the darkness. Ready for action, Kevin lunged out, only to discover that it was his ally, Mia. They both stared at each other in surprise. Kevin quickly explained that he hadn't died but had been tricked by Adrian. After taking a moment to regain her composure, Mia revealed that she was also searching for someone. Just a few hours earlier, she and Brian had been in the warehouse, waiting for Adrian to return from his food scavenging mission. To their surprise, Brian was gone when they woke up. Mia had no choice but to look for him, but the place was too vast and they had to split up. Kevin continued his quest for Eve and Alex only to once again encounter the treacherous Adrian in the supermarket. Without a word, Kevin charged at him, beating him up to vent his pent-up hatred. Adrian immediately begged for mercy, claiming he knew where Eve and Alex were. Kevin stopped his attack upon hearing this. Apparently, not long ago, Adrian had been detained with Eve and Alex. He was irritated by the flirtatious behavior between Alex and Jay. Taking advantage of Jay's distraction, he picked up a barrel and threw it at him. When Alex questioned him, Adrian calmly stated that Jay had violated her. It took a great deal of effort for Alex to calm down. Just then, the warehouse door was opened, and walking in was Jay's father, the sheriff. He had previously made an agreement with the mall manager to come here to take his son Jay away. Jay. However, Eve, Alex, and Adrian were not aware of this. The sheriff's visit was not just about rescuing his son. He had never forgotten his mission. To disperse the fog, he had to offer the guilty Jay as a sacrifice to the new deity of nature. When the glass door was slowly opened, Jay immediately sensed something was wrong. But before he could react, he was ruthlessly pushed out by his sheriff father. Jay couldn't understand why his father would place him in such a dangerous situation. The sheriff's eyes were bloodshot, clearly tormented by his actions. Eve and Alex, left in the warehouse, were soon let out by the manager. Adrian was also released. Upon hearing about Eve and Alex's ordeal, Kevin didn't even scold Adrian anymore. This provided the boy with a chance to escape. He promptly lit the scattered paint on the floor. Kevin couldn't be bothered with him and hurriedly ran towards the hall. By this time, Eve and Alex had been brought before everyone by the manager. Everyone accused Alex of being in league with the fog. Only the woman who had been living with Eve came forward to speak up for them, but she was shot dead by the security guard. The situation was clear. As food was about to run out, they needed a scapegoat for their anxiety. The manager announced that Eve and her daughter were to be expelled from the mall. Just then, the sheriff and Natalie entered the hall. Eve, grasping at straws, revealed a shocking secret to secure the sheriff's help. Before she met Kevin, Eve was already pregnant with Alex, and her biological father was the sheriff standing before them. This was why Eve was so opposed to Alex being with Jay. The sheriff, although visibly shocked, stood motionless, allowing the crowd to push Eve and Alex to the door. Fortunately, Kevin arrived in the nick of time, although the family reunion was awkward. Upon hearing that Eve and Alex were being expelled, Kevin immediately lashed out at the security guard. Bystanders rushed to stop Kevin, causing chaos on the scene. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out. The manager drew his weapon to control the crowd. His gaze landed on Kevin, provocatively saying that he should not care too much because Alex wasn't his daughter. Surprisingly, Kevin was not shocked by this. He had known that all along. Looking at the ugly faces in front of him, his eyes filled with anger. He then turned around and led Eve and Alex out of the mall. Kevin remembered that an army vehicle was parked at the back door. But as they were leaving, Alex suddenly fell ill, her body wrapped in thick fog. She tried to speak but couldn't make a sound. At the crucial moment, a shadow pushed Alex out of the fog, allowing her to regain consciousness. It was Jay, who had been in love with her. Kevin and the others immediately put Alex in the just-arrived army vehicle. But Jay was already engulfed in the dense fog. It was too late to rescue him. Alex cried uncontrollably in the car. Kevin took the opportunity to tell everyone about Adrian's actions, and the people in the car couldn't believe someone could be so vile. Eve urged them to leave immediately. Back in the mall, Natalie began to incite the crowd again, repeating the rhetoric of the deity of nature. But the sheriff, seeing that his son had been dead for a long time and the fog outside did not diminish, grew increasingly dissatisfied with Natalie. As Kevin and the others were passing by the mall entrance, they saw the clueless crowd inside, and their anger reached its peak. After telling everyone to buckle up, Kevin stomped on the gas, driving the vehicle straight into the mall entrance. The thick fog instantly rushed in, and everyone scattered in panic, screaming for help. But one by one, they fell to the ground, lifeless, paying a heavy price for their previous selfish actions. Natalie's eyes were somewhat hollow. She knew it was all over. In a daze, she saw her late husband walking out with a baby. She tremblingly took the baby, and under its incessant sucking, she gradually turned into a dried corpse. However, the back of the mall's main hall was temporarily untouched by the fog. While Mia was sleeping, Brian, who had gone out to find food, suddenly ran into the low-ranking private whose dead comrade had once radioed a place called Arrowhead Base. The private was surprised to see Brian and even gave a solemn salute as if they had known each other for a long time. However, Brian, who had lost all of his memories after waking up in the forest, only started to recall some familiar scenes when he saw the private. Without any concealment, the private revealed that he and his companions were ordered to come to the town to find Brian before the fog appeared. They had to take him back to Arrowhead Base because he was one of the essential experiment subjects. Brian was ready to leave without any hesitation as he realized that the fog was intricately related to the base from the Arrowhead project. He felt he had to visit it no matter what. The two then climbed into the vehicle they arrived in, unaware that Adrian, barely alive, was hidden in the trunk. On the other side, after Kevin shattered the glass door of the hall, he floored the gas pedal again, driving towards the highway. They planned to leave this small town, reasoning that it couldn't be possible for the entire world to be covered in fog. Surprisingly, they happened upon a passing train halfway and curiously followed it to the train station. There, they witnessed a horrifying scene. Civilians in uniforms were being pushed off the train. Kevin immediately realized that these civilians were being fed to the fog and a big conspiracy was still in the dark. With that, the drama comes to an end. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.